especially with the challenges now, where I think traditionally education was math and English, we're now having to provide.
So excited to be here. It's a little strange to be on this side of the table, but love that we're here with my colleagues. Yeah, as Vinny mentioned, I sit on the education committee. In this last session, I sat on what was called the select committee for special ed. There's a select committee created specifically around our top priority bill in the House on special ed. And so a lot of great things came out of that. A lot of good things that are going to trickle out to our districts pretty soon. There's some grant money too, much like what we've done around our transition academy. There's going to be grant money to the seed grant. We're really trying to encourage districts to create in-district programming as opposed to outplacing workforces, and really giving districts the opportunity to build either physical spaces or programmatic, programs and projects like that. So that's really great. Another big thing that came out of that is kind of reviving or bringing along the Bergen Commission, which is a commission created back in 2023 around some of the ECS formulaic discussions and legislation. And so this bill thankfully kind of revitalized that. And I've been put on that commission and one of the subcommittees for just the individual teacher in terms of time and expense, and trying to evaluate that along with the State Department of Education to kind of gather all that data, find efficiencies, not lose obviously the care and concern for the student, and then share that data on our state website and try to really find best practices around that. Another thing we're looking at is around tier 2 interventions and really trying to evaluate what works, what doesn't. How can we really capture these students before they move on to the 504 IEP process? And largely too, looking at reading interventions and how can we incentivize boards of ed and districts to really invest in reading interventionists, because we've seen a real drop off in that. And very often what happens in special ed needs is child gets identified and needing these supports. And I know Jen, you know a lot around literacy, but and so we're going to be studying that data and then reporting back to the state so by the end of this year on that. In terms of the education committee, some of the things on the horizon are very dissimilar from what we've all been kind of dealing with here in district and looking at, as Vinny said, around AI and technology and cell phone use. Spoke to the House chair, and it's definitely a priority, hopefully going into this session, that we're going to maybe look at a state policy. Guilford just decided as of September they'll ban on cell phones. So other districts are trying to piece together things, and hopefully we'll see the state have a separate and making some of the regulations, looking at teacher retention and recruitment and finding ways to support that. Also looking at how we can better support higher education and student loan programming around some of those critical needs in education and specialties. I know here in district, it's really hard to find language teachers, special ed teachers. So maybe looking at some of that. So that's just a few things. Probably talk for a long time about it, but happy to hear your questions.
Thank you, Juan. It's hard to believe that it's been 8 years since I was on Dick Hirsch took my seat on the Board of Education. Thank you for that. And thank you all for your service. I know how much work goes into this and how much care you all have to make sure that the district is doing well and healthy and supported. So thank you for that. I think Vinny and Moira covered a lot. I will reiterate, I represent 8 towns. I have 2 regional school districts in the 12th Senate district. And so the needs really vary from town to town, even within the small group of towns that I represent here in our little sort of central shoreline community. That being said, a lot of the needs do overlap, and I think overarching is ECS, as they both mentioned. I am a part of a working group on ECS, hoping to make some recommendations, whether that's changing the foundation grant number, whether, you know, we're tying to inflation, whatever we do, we need to do something. 7 of the 8 towns I represent are considered full harness towns. By way of the formula, that means that, we assume these towns are getting more than the formula allows. You know, that doesn't work for anybody, right? We just extended the hold harmless agreement another 2 years, so for this budget cycle. But we need to figure it out moving forward. So we're not constantly fighting to make sure that, the hold harmless towns are indeed receiving the funding, to make sure that we have supports in place for our students. So that's a priority. I think you'll hear a lot of talk about that this session. I am seated on committees on both ends of the spectrum. I sit on higher education. I also sit on the children's committee. Continued focus on early childhood education. I think we saw a lot of that even last session in terms of incentivizing school districts, whether it be through school construction or just offering other grants in terms of early childhood education. Workforce development continues to be a focus, making sure that our high school students are prepared for the workforce if they're not going into a 4-year degree program or even a 2-year program. Making sure that we are aligning with businesses within the state of Connecticut on their needs, trade and technical skills continue to be incredibly important for our manufacturers and small businesses across the state. So working to really partner up with our districts in that regard. In terms of bioscience as well, that's another, you know, hot topic right now, making sure that we're in high schools right now talking about that community and, you know, what the job offerings are out there within the state of Connecticut for students graduating from high school as well as those who seek advanced degrees. So that's a lot of what we're talking about on those committees. Again, I think there'll be continued discussions about how we can best support districts financially. You know, whether that be through school construction, grants, continued, you know, advanced learning programs, things of that nature. We did a lot of that last session and I think that those discussions will continue. We're not developing a new budget. This is a short session. So, you know, we're limited in our ability to make, you know, sweeping changes in terms of funding, but we recognize that districts are really feeling constrained by budgets right now, and we want to do whatever we can to help support student vote. So
wonderful. So, as each of you touched upon, various aspects of things that we've either been discussing or are kind of sitting in front of us. AI for sure. We had a technology and education advisory group that was formed last academic year. John Levin was one of the people from that community that really started to look at AI and cell phone use. As Maura mentioned, we passed, the board passed a cell phone use policy to be implemented next September. Which would be a bell-to-bell morning to afternoon ban, although we are recognizing that as the state may also be weighing in on that topic. We are starting the budget, not starting the budget process. What am I talking about? We are receiving the superintendent's budget this evening, and we'll be grappling with some pretty challenging budget decisions as we've seen the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, finding ourselves in a position to really be dealing with percentage increases that have been much higher than we had to deal with 6 and 7 and 10 years ago. But I do, I'm imagining that my colleagues, Dr. Freeman, other administrators may have some questions, so I do want to allow folks to kind of feel free to ask questions of our next session.
Sure. You guys threw around the oh God, I can't remember it's on ECS. Can you just spell out what that is for the audience, because people watching this may not know what ECS is?
It's education cost sharing formula that was established a number of years ago. It's supposed to be tied to pupils. Right now, it is a per pupil sort of assessment based on wealth indexes. It used to be more heavily weighted toward free and reduced lunch. We shifted it to second language learners. You get additional money for that. So it's a weighted system. And that's where Christine talked about the whole harmless piece. Now that we, in 2017, shifted it to a true sort of formula, the problem with that is that there will be fluctuation for towns based on student population and demographics. And so we've held towns harmless. Communities that are seeing an uprise in second English language will receive more funding. So we are sort of maintaining the new formula. But I think the hold harmless is showing that we recognize that we need to put more money into the formula.
Yeah, we have 80 towns in the state that are hold harmless towns. So we know, in 2017, and that was part of my tenure, but I know Vinny was part of those negotiations. And the idea was to fully fund ECS, which was incredibly important to districts, but there were some losses in this formula. And so it left, legislators sort of fighting for their districts to not lose funding by way of this new formula. And so we recognize that it's not ideal. And I think by and large, most of us want to see some changes that properly distribute the funds. Thank you.
Other questions from?
We talk a lot about free reduced and about free. Is there any progress or any comment from the state about possibly returning to something that we did post-COVID, where kids are able to get free meals, breakfast and or lunch?
And we're not looking at you, it's just I kind of become like the poster child
Yeah.
in the legislature around this issue. And not just me, but I'm the one here. So, yes, so during COVID and post-COVID, we had a lot of federal funding to kind of allow us to kind of carry that on. One year we were able to do breakfast every, and then some districts were able to budget and carry it on a little longer. And I remember we had kind of mid-year, we kind of had to pull back on that. And then 2 years ago, we were able to eke out a little bit of money to take reduced children and make them free, if they qualify reduced. And we tried last year to get that little bit of money, didn't happen, but there seems to be a lot of will and hopefully support around looking at this again. I can't commit to anything, but I know there's a lot of conversations. The governor has said it out loud. He'd really like to see us do universal breakfast. My goal and the goal of a lot of my colleagues and advocates around this is really just to kind of really build back. Because there's so much positive data, and I could talk about it for a long time, I won't, but there's so much positive data that we learned out of when we universally fed all of our kids. We nationally reduced poverty by 37%. Participation rates, I know here in district went up exponentially. And when we pulled it back in the high school, I remember talking to someone in the town district that we went down 50, we reduced 50%. And so we know that, the argument back is, well, why am I going to feed a kid in a wealthy town? But we also know that there's a whole host of reasons why a child doesn't eat at school. And there's all sorts of health reasons and mental health reasons why we should at least try to feed them at least one time during the day. So that's a long-winded answer. I'm hopeful. There's a lot of, I think, out of all the cuts we saw a few months ago around SNAP, it really shed a light on the level of food insecurity in Connecticut. And that with the cost of food rising over the last several years, that would really, budgets are tight and families, you wouldn't expect them to be tight. And so it kind of goes under this umbrella of affordability that I hope as a legislature we're really going to try to tackle. And I hope that that's one piece of it.
And we're seeing more and more people,
Yes.
to Moira's point, she's been such a champion of this and grateful to her for being, for being so outspoken on it. But we're only gonna see more, and we need to do more beyond breakfast. So ideally, we have free lunch, right? Beyond that. And we have districts with huge disparities, even within the district themselves, of schools that have the number of students on free and reduced, we need to equalize that. within districts as well. So, you know, a lot to talk about and a lot to think about as we move forward.
Like Christine points out, is so a district gets federal funding based on how many students qualify for free and reduced. And there's kind of this middle section they're called, you know, CEP districts. And so they go 25% up to, I think, 63%, I remember the number. They get some funding, but not all. And so that district has to step up and make up the difference. They're not required to do that. So some districts elect to do it and some don't. And they have to kind of provide a budget line for that. So to Christine's point, that metric is really tilting to more kids needing the support, more families needing the support. You know, one of the things that happen is when a family or a child qualifies for SNAP, they are automatically certified for free lunches in school. But with the qualifications around SNAP changing, the data is that we will lose a lot of kids that will fall out of that compliance or won't get auto certified. And so it's just a slippery slope. And so I'm hoping we can do something.
Questions? Go ahead, Dr.
Thank you all for being here. I did take the opportunity to leave a copy of CAPS's legislative statement. I appreciate that we're talking about funding and the importance of funding, but I also really appreciate that if you look at what CAPS put together this year, our first concern as superintendents isn't about dollars and cents. It's a request that we work together collaboratively to elevate the status of public schools in Connecticut and public school teachers in Connecticut. It's just a really challenging time to be a public school teacher right now. There are narratives out there about failing schools. There are conversations that place teachers in really difficult positions. And I would just like to really encourage all of us to work to tell the story of public education in Guilford and in Connecticut more broadly and celebrate what is really happening, the real stories. And so I did just want to draw your attention to that. I didn't provide a copy for every board member because I don't have enough yet, but I will get copies for all of you as well. These are hot off the press. CAPS does then move right into talking about the importance of increasing the state's share. So raising that foundation in ECS, connecting it to a COLA, I think would be really important. And looking at special education as well. So all the things that you're talking about. If we could get into the weeds a little bit, I did want to bring our attention to the electrification bill for school buses. I am wholly in favor of that, and I think that is a good direction to be moving. I'm concerned that Guilford is on a short list of communities that need to fully electrify by 2030. Where most of the state has until 2040 to make it to that deadline. I don't understand the metrics by which Guilford was placed on that list, so I really do want to encourage all of you to.
Well, I thought it
Shared
was across the
transportation.
board, 2030.
Yeah.
It is supposed to be across the board. There are particulars around like certain environmental justice communities, different communities have different timelines, although the EJ communities are actually supposed to get more incentives, but also move up the timeline versus pushing it back. I will just say, as not only Senate Chair of Transportation currently, but the Senate Chair of the Environment, when we wrote this bill.
Yep.
Times were very different.
Yeah, so
that we were under a different federal administration. We had a Clean Air Act federally that we were following.
Yep.
The trajectory was that school buses were being electrified across the country. There were a tremendous number of federal incentives to electrify that the state, was going to reap the benefits of, and all of that's been rolled back.
Right.
So recognizing that we are in a very different environment from a funding standpoint, and certainly recognizing the constraints that districts are feeling in terms of budgets right now, I'm having discussions actively about what that looks like moving forward. I really want to be careful about pendulum swings, right? And so I'm being mindful of that, while also being mindful about how we move forward in a thoughtful way that doesn't, put this huge burden on districts' backs.
yeah, so I'd love to talk more about how we can work with you to make sure that we're still moving in that direction. I think most of us would think that it's a really positive direction to move in, but in a way that is reasonable and tenable for Guilford. I'm going to be presenting in a little bit about our budget this year, and the transportation increase this year without fully electrifying is significant. And so just want to make sure that it's a manageable lift and that we're thoughtfully moving in a good direction. So thank you. We really appreciate that. I also wanted to comment a little bit on the changes that have been implemented in the school climate plan, because I think it's a good example of when we've got multiple good things that are going on, and sometimes they can run into each other. So the focus on special education and the seed money, encouraging school districts to keep more challenging students at home. You all know that it's been more than 10 years now that we've been focused on keeping more of our students home in our Guilford schools. Some of the really good news that I'm going to share in a little bit is that our tuition for outplacements is dropping this year because we're keeping more of our students at home. And I think most of the changes to the school climate statute have been really positive. But there's one requirement for communication that falls in there about when a student is disruptive. And it triggers a series of public notifications that need to be made to parents of other students in the classroom. That was a time where previously the building teacher and the administrators there had discretion about what happened in the classroom, who was involved, and how do we share that, and with which parents do we share that. There are triggers in there now that essentially say, if a student is really disruptive in the classroom, you have to immediately notify all parents in that classroom in writing. And while we would never include a student's name, it's as easy as saying to your child what happened in school today. So we're worried that on the one hand, we're keeping more students in district, but when those students may be dysregulated and need support and sometimes have behaviors that can be disruptive to others, sending a letter home holding that student up for parental scrutiny not only can be counterproductive, but it might violate FERPA in some ways. And so again, we do really good things. We're doing two good things in two directions, but it's sometimes they sort of bump into each other. And so I don't know if there'll be an opportunity to massage that climate legislation this year. But if there is, again, I'd love to have more conversation and talk a little bit about how to maintain the intent without putting a principal in a really uncomfortable position of, if I do what the law seems to require me to do, I'm going to be holding this child who's really struggling and making good progress up for scrutiny. And it puts parents in difficult situations. It does a number of things. So again, I would just really encourage you to keep an eye out for it. And I'd be happy to make some suggestions along the way if it looks like there's an opportunity to tweak that and maintain the intent without creating a difficult sort of conflict between two good ideas.
I think CDA has also flagged that a little bit.
Yeah.
Speaking with the president of PTS last week, and I know they're really grateful
Yep.
for what we did, but they're, like, to your point, there are a few instances where intent and are crashing a little bit. That wasn't driven by anything outreach to students or anything like that, but I know that it was part of their overall kind of, not calling it out specific, but just asking us to kind of look at some of those scenarios.
And we recognize that the devil is in the details. The science of reading, and right, the intention behind that was so positive and everything was so good. And then it's sometimes the regulations that get written that end up creating the complications. So I know it becomes iterative, and it involves you guys passing something and then the regs getting written and then needing to hear from people like us saying, that's great, but can we just massage it a little bit? So I understand that we don't get right in the first attempt. I sort of understand that completely. Those were a couple that I really wanted to make sure that we mentioned.
Yeah.
tonight.
Where's the governor? Does he have an agenda, an education agenda that's clear, coherent, and public at least with regard to the legislature?
I think the legislature has really kind of driven it more, partly because, we're working with the districts, it's really sort of grassroots up. So a lot of the initiative when it comes to K through 12, especially, his focus is a little bit on early childhood. But I think for K through 12, and it's almost always been that way, it's the legislature that has those initiatives and pushes them. But
Because it's often like at the beginning of every legislative session, when we sort of get the state of the state address, we learn a little bit more about the governor's priorities with respect to education. And each year there is a focus. However, to Vinny's point, that focus, it does become our focus oftentimes. The legislature, will take the ball and run with it, but it's really up to us to formulate the policy around it and see.
Early childhood has been a big
Yeah.
push.
The cell phone,
Yeah,
that's
that's right.
and,
Yeah.
some of these
Early
things.
childhood was a big reach for him at first, to create this separate fund and this endowment, because I'm sure you've heard these terms like fiscal guardrails and, our caps on spending and revenue. So, yes, so that was a big leap for him, I think, early on. It came around and it's gonna be hopefully superbly beneficial for our earliest learners. But, yeah, I think from what I've only been here 3 years, but from what I see, it's really driven by us and the input of our districts, especially around education.
Well, I was backing into the larger point. If the governor were more involved in terms of education as a priority, would we see the legislature finding it easier to do the things that it wants to do in the first place?
So I think a lot of the nuts and bolts in the education initiatives does come out of the legislature. The governor will point out priorities. One of the benefits we have that a governor doesn't have is we get the revenue numbers a lot later than he does. So he's crafting his budget right now, all the budget adjustments. Time and again, there's been articles written. We've been lucky in the last 8 years, we see this influx of revenue, and it puts us in a very different position. So the governor didn't initially come out and want to propose funding special education at the levels that we ended up funding it initially, only because the revenue wasn't there. When the revenue came in, the governor came on board and said, yeah, this makes sense. So it's from that process, the budget is really driven by everybody, because we just don't get a good picture until the spring. And I think to Christine's point, there are smaller initiatives that we will propose, like the early childhood and the cell phone use. The ECSO is something I think that will always end up percolating through the process as opposed to being an initiative. I think the last time a governor proposed an ECS increase across the board was Governor Rell back in 2007, which created quite the mess going into the legislature. So I know it's kind of rare, I think, we ever see a governor proposing right out of the gate to increase education funding.
To that point, I also don't see him as a hindrance to, big policy initiatives in education. I think he's a huge proponent of public education. And I haven't seen him as a roadblock to some of these initiatives. I mean, obviously there's budgetary constraints, and that's really more often than not what we're running into.
Well, and I want to point out, that's where I think that we are so fortunate. The three of you know this community and these schools so well, and you are always willing to take a phone call for me when I call. And I think, and every one of you has reached out to ask a question when there's something that comes across your desks and want to know how it will impact Guilford and our schools. So I really appreciate the accessibility and the way that you all make yourselves available to this board, to this community, and support our schools. I think we're one of the most fortunate communities in the state because of the way that you have all partnered with us in this work. And so thank you for that.
Very nice to say. I do want to reiterate that if anybody, I think most of you have our cell phone numbers, please use them. And to the community as well. I mean, I do pride myself on being accessible. That's why I'm in this position. And so I want to hear from people and understand, any questions they may have. And likewise, when something comes up education related and we're not sure about it and we need to vote on it, certainly our first thoughts.
And really appreciate
in this
that.
budget process you all go through, I just happened to see Katie at our DTC meeting, and I know, like, for example, health insurance, there's going to be things that are going to come up in your local process that probably are echoing around state. So it's really important that we know about that.
Yeah, so I had two things, just exactly transitioning to that. And I am on a Board of Ed chair, the sort of cave. So around this time, there's all kinds of discussion happening. So I'm sure we're not alone, and I'm gonna jump a little bit on some things we're gonna hear from Dr. Freeman in a few minutes, but you know, at the moment, we're looking at a 25% increase potentially next year from medical benefits, which is a $2.6 million increase. We're looking at 34% increase in electricity. No doubt you know this, right? And the work that's going on in the legislature around special education reflects this, but you know, so many of our communities across the state and probably nationally are seeing really an increase in kids who need support. You know, social, emotional, special ed, kind of a spectrum of support. But, you know, we're also looking at, in our own budget, in 20% increase in special services that we're contracting for, because we have brought so many kids back in. And again, probably year 3 or year 4, we're looking, you know, we're starting at such a high number. And I've only said this about 10 times in the last week already. Like, I feel like we're already at the, like, looking under the car mat for the change. Like, this is going to be a challenge, because as you know, we fund school budgets on communities, and the people in our town and the people in New Haven and Bridgeport and Waterbury and all the other towns in the state are likely going to be looking for increases from constituents who are seeing these increases in their own homes. It's really becoming a challenge to figure this out and to make such difficult decisions when what we want to do is provide the best educational experience for the students in the community, but have to make hard choices about how to fund those things.
Yeah, I think it's why we have to really look at the ECS, because one of the things that worries me too is, you know, in North Branford last year for our education system, I think they were given a $200,000 increase, which was, you know, 1% potentially. It was about $1 million less than what they were looking for. And despite that cut, the budget still failed, and it failed as being too high,
Right.
Overwhelmingly. I think it was close to 90%. And so when you look at that, you're seeing that parents are voting against their child's interest in school because they can't afford the property taxes. And I just worry generally that we're kind of headed there, especially with property values increasing, that it really has shifted from commercial to residential. So any town that's gone through a rebound, we just went through it. It was a huge impact. And we really have to take that to Hartford and have that conversation. With the revenue that we have seen come into the state, we need to get that passed down to the towns.
And we are seeing, you know, this sort of becomes a political hot button, because we're
Sure.
seeing some people also fighting to lift the MBR, the minimum budget requirement, which is really problematic if you think about it, because we don't want to unfund our school or defund our school. So the minimum budget requirement is that districts, I think most of you are probably community. Thank you, I forgot the camera was here, but the districts are required to come back unless there's, you know, caveats to that, unless there is significant declining enrollment. But they are required to come back with at least, you know, this minimum budget that they had in the prior cycle. So I think, you know, we have to be cognizant that that is something that some folks are pushing for in light of school budgets failing, in light of these increases and the inability to sustain the numbers and continually invest in education. So, you know, these are fixed costs, right? That we need to provide health insurance, we need electricity to keep our schools running. And so, you know, something's got to give. We just have started, you know, taking the valuable resources and tools for our students and our students' well-being in the future. And I really worry about that. So, yeah, ECS. It all comes back to ECS. I mean, and of course, fighting for better electric policy, but that's really difficult in Connecticut. The landscape is just very, very difficult. Healthcare as well. I'd love to see us move on health insurance in a big way in the state of Connecticut, but that's been very difficult to do as well. And like you said, we're seeing that across the board, businesses, districts,
Sure.
Everybody is seeing these astronomical increases. Stop losses if we.
Right. Well, I don't, we could probably keep you all night, but we won't. I do want to thank you so much for joining us. And just echo Dr. Freeman, your availability to us, which is so valuable. Kind of a closing last question and question for the community, as well to you. What's the best way for any member of our community to kind of keep up with public hearings that are coming up that might be relevant to some of what we're talking about? Do you have kind of guidance? I would love to give, we have some really
Yeah, the
wonderfully
best-
active community members.
The best thing is the CGA website, the
Right.
Connecticut General Assembly website. And on the main page, you can look at committees. And you can look at their agendas, their hearing calendar. You can look at the physical calendar that's on.
Sure.
And so you can see when you can, and the nice thing one of the benefits is that we become a little more flexible about in-person versus virtual. And so you can register to testify. You can testify from your home online on Zoom. You can send in written testimony. You can submit it electronically. You're more than welcome to sign up to be there in person. But, and I would highly encourage our constituents to please participate in it. It's really great for us as committee members. We don't want to hear the legislators come and testify or, it's great, but when someone in your community comes and testifies, like, that's really, really valuable for us. And it's something we can actually take back to leadership and it has more weight to it. So I think it does. And so I think it's really valuable. It's not hard to navigate, but obviously all of us are resources. If you ever have a question or want to know when the Ed Committee is having their next, or I'm on the finance, the vice chair of finance, when we're having our conversations or appropriations, and our hearings, please, and everything is recorded as well. So when you get to that website, CTN is kind of our in-house legislative TV channel, I guess you call it, and they record everything. And so you can always go back and watch the testimony or the meetings and hear what's going on as well.
And if you go to our websites, we
Yeah.
have
Yes.
newsletters.
Yeah.
So people can sign up for our newsletters. And we typically, some of the hotter topics, we'll send out emails reminding people of, what issues are up there.
Your communications are really helpful.
Yeah,
Stuff
no.
The ones that you all put out are really very helpful.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. We have to make sure to make this annual. I'm not looking at Dr. because he's responsible for that. We jointly are, but I've missed this the last couple of years. And it's great to have you here. And thank you, obviously, for your service to our community and to the state.
Thanks, you guys.
So
So good to see you.
All right, thank you. Right. Our student reps are welcome to come, take seats, and you're gonna be on your item in just a few minutes. We do have the next agenda item is to act on our December 8th, 2025 meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve those minutes? So moved. Second?
Okay.
All right. Any correction?
Page one, paragraph 4, halfway down. Just, I think it feels the proposed policy will make the district stronger, help our teachers focus on educating our students without the distraction of social media. I mean, it's small, but
I'm sorry, I missed where that is.
right here.
Oh,
Moving to IMG.
there we go.
Yeah.
I think that's right. ING should be ION. Yep.
And I had one, the first instance is at the top of the page. Our newest board member, Jennifer Scoggins, the last name is Scoggin. On page 3, halfway down the page, under Guilford Preschool, the second line, chorus and orchestra are holding concerts. And then, at the top of page 4, very top, first line. Ms. Baldwin knows that draft number 2 has school ending on June 18th, and she noted that that should say June 19th. Is the new Juneteenth holiday. Sorry, and then, one more, the very last page, page 7. The first paragraph, I think there may be a timing thing here, which is related to taking minutes and not related to the minutes itself. So the last sentence, she suggested not waiting until September to empower the principals at the elementary and middle school level to implement a policy as it stands now. I think the remainder of that is unrelated to the sentence. 1 hour, 22 minutes total time of the meeting. So I think that can probably just be deleted. Also, as I read the sentence, I realized that principals is PRINCIPALS there. Any other comments on the minutes? All right, so there's a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the minutes as amended, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? All right, thank you. Public comments for topics on the agenda. Is there anyone who wants to address the board on a topic on the agenda? Okay. Turning to Mr. Brooks for review of the financials.
Regarding the December 2025 financial reports, expenditures for the month of December 2025 were $676,216.02. Expenditures through the end of December were about 44% of the budget, as compared to 45% for the previous year. All in all, this was a unremarkable month. As such, I'll try to keep it very brief because I know we have a lot. So basically, salaries, employee benefits, purchase services, they were in line or lower than the previous year. Similarly, as was tuition, the supplies, materials, capital also lower than the previous year, the prior year. Transportation was higher than the previous year. That was just due to the timing of the payments for special education buses. Look at a couple of specific points. There was a professional development credit as a result of money being put into the budget and moved once a grant was received. So that's what that goes for. First $1,000. There were also a fund contribution that's recognized. It's also just over $900, and that represents the total that was collected by 4 schools. That's not the total amount collected because we also collected monies via a funding portal that source was we went into this in a little bit more detail during operations. I think there were There were a couple of briefings of checks with regard to warrants. And that was as a result of Middletown BOE needing payments made slightly differently with regard to special education payments. And the fact that when we went to purchase learning materials from Pearson, it accidentally got sent to the wrong branch of their company, the wrong division, and we got to reissue the things. I think that's the subtotal.
All right, and as you alluded to, both the report and the ones were discussed in some detail in the Board of Ed Operations Committee meeting just prior to this. Any other questions on this report before we approve it? All right, so can I have a motion to approve the December 2025 financial reports for the fiscal year 25-26?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Or abstained? All right, that's everyone. Thank you. We're up to communications. Did any of my colleagues receive any communications they think we should be reporting out in the past month? It was quiet. First we had a holiday break and other things. All right. We are now up to student reps, so I'm going to turn it over to you. I hope you all had a nice break. Yeah.
They had their sponsored food drive in support of the Guilford School Pantry, and they collected 450 items, which was much appreciated by the organization. And the PTO had an amazing book fair, which was in partnership with the Sip Pop and Shop, which I think is like a new server place in town. And so they had drinks, popcorn, and of course, a lot of book shopping. And then GHS Voices visited the entire school following a successful meeting about the portrait of a graduate. And they had fun and really within the holiday spirit. And for Baldwin in December, they had various events that celebrated community and art. And they also had a visit from Voices as well. And then recently, students are preparing for a project for the Connecticut Invention Convention, which is challenging real world problem solving skills as well as creativity skills. And more recently, I think this week, they also had an internet safety course sponsored by the Guilford Youth and Family Services, which they cover topics like long-term and immediate impacts of making choices online, like leaving a digital footprint. And they also taught them about how to make a positive online presence or how to have a positive online presence. And then for Lakes, they had their Hats for Hope, and they were able to raise $300 for the cancer research through the Tommy Fund. And GHS Voices also visited them. Voices visited them on the 19th of December, so we went to all the elementary schools. It was really fun. And then they also had a bunch of holiday themed activities. So one example they gave was they used magma tiles in the makerspace to create gingerbread houses.
For AOD Cox, this month's focus was on perseverance, whereas December was kind of compassion, which goes with the holiday season and everything, and the creative compassionate snowflakes with a real nice message on each of them for school. Students are continuing with their studies for each grade level. So kindergarten was work on the weather, grade 1 sun and moon, grade 2 paleontology, grade 3 frogs, and grade 4 animal defense. And classes are wrapping up units, kind of celebrating that half-year mark almost in the school year. And we're very excited and confident about how to get learning the units.
At Adams Middle School, they just had their 8th grade orchestra and chorus concerts before the break ended. This week, the 7th grade, the orchestra, the chorus, and the band are all performing. The orchestra and the band will be performing together Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. That concert will be followed by a combined 7th and 8th grade choral concert on Thursday. The select ensembles will then take the stage the following week on Wednesday, January 21st. I'm also very proud to announce that Adams Middle School has been certified as a distinguished kindness school by the Random Acts of Kindness Foundation.
This recognition places Adams as only the second middle school to have ever received this award. The achievement is the result of the dedication efforts of the Adams Student Council, which collected more than 400 signatures from students pledging that they will make kindness the norm at Adams. This will be celebrated in honor with a full school assembly in February, leading into Random Acts of Kindness Week and planning to make kindness a theme for the spring semester. At Calvin Lee, they hosted a hot shot event, which was a competition where students collaborated together and they had to get a total of 16 shots on basketball hoops, and the distance from each basketball hoop gave them a certain amount of money, and that money went to a donation, and they were all donated in the end to buy new unwrapped toys for children in need for the holiday season. And then they also hosted a coat drive, which donated its proceeds to families in need for the holiday season. The students just participated in a pull-up test, which the new pull-up bar was donated generously by the PTO, which encourages the students' confidence and new year goals, which is their main goal for the whole point of the pull-up. We have midterms next week. There's a lot of concerts going up in February. They're gonna have the Meals on Wheels, which is a concert with the wind ensemble, jazz band and voices. It's very fun. They serve food and it's also a fundraiser for the food banks. They also just started rehearsals for the spring musical last Monday. So all of the roles are out and they're already starting rehearsals with the band and orchestra.
Yeah, we just got the email about that.
Yeah,
Super excited. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
I don't want to keep you much longer. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your
Thank
evening.
you very
Good
much.
luck with the
Thanks for your
exams.
patience.
All right, superintendent's report.
You're ready. Yeah, he's ready.
One time a year that I make a presentation from the podium, so I do appreciate the help setting up. So I know that you all received your budget book last week. This is our opportunity to walk through the initial administrative proposed budget that we bring to you. I know that there will be extensive conversation following this presentation this evening. I want to start by reminding the board, but more specifically the community, that everything that we present in this budget and everything that we will discuss tonight flows from some foundational components here in the school district. And the first component to that foundation is our portrait of the graduate. Every decision that we make in this budget flows from our goals and our expectations for every one of our students. I want to remind the community that there is an art direction posted on this website that talks about the instructional environment when we talk about what it is that we expect of our students, the expectations that we all will hold for every student. And there's an interaction between and among three specific components. The first is the portrait of the graduate. The portrait names the skills and competencies that we expect of our students. And so we expect our students to leave our halls as adaptable learners, responsible collaborators, effective communicators, critical thinkers, empathetic individuals, and impactful global citizens. Again, those are the competencies, those are the skills that we are talking about. When employers are looking for employees, they want people who know how to collaborate, who learn on the job, who are effective team members and communicators, and who think critically on their feet and make decisions. as well as being easy and compassionate to work with and contributing to the larger environment. The portrait of the graduate doesn't stand alone, however. It interacts with the Connecticut state standards and our grade level curricula. The curricula provide the content. If the portrait of the graduate are the skills that we want our students to learn, the curricula lay out the things that we want our students to learn. And you can't develop complex skills without working with deep content. Further, on our website, you'll also find reference to our shared understanding of high quality instruction. Our understanding of high quality instruction, or HQI, speaks to our pedagogy. That is the how that our teachers lead our students through the content, ultimately building the competencies that we want them to develop. And so it is those three components together, the competencies and skills that students only learn through rigorous content presented in a way, in a pedagogy that centers student activity and learning, where we have kids working, thinking hard, and making that thinking visible to themselves, to their classmates, and to their teachers. And again, there's a long art direction on our website that describes that in more detail. But as we talk about our budget, the values that our budget represents, I want to remind the community that it stems from that portrait and the things to which that portrait connects. Every year, this Board of Education sets for us even more specifically priorities and annual initiatives that we will work on. And every year's budget is informed by the priorities and the initiatives on which we're currently working. Our priorities have stayed true for more than a decade now. We want to provide schools that are both physically and emotionally safe. We want to do that in a professional environment where our instructors are constantly learning and always at the top of their game. I continue to believe that Guilford has the best teachers in the state, and that doesn't happen by accident. And then and only then, if we create safe and professional environments, will we be able to get to the academic challenge and those high expectations that we hold for every student in every class every day. And I'm really proud of the fact that in Guilford, those three priorities have stayed true over the last several years. Every year, we then work on initiatives that fall under those priorities. In this particular year, we're working on continue to develop our professional learning around that high quality instruction, the pedagogy that I just referenced. We're continuing to work on curriculum revisions. We're always in the process of updating the content that our students are expected to know. We're currently working on developing grade level measures or progressions that help us to see those competencies that we articulate in the portrait of the graduate. We're continuing to work as we're required by the state of Connecticut on restorative practices that help all students know that they belong in our schools. That is shifting from a more punitive disciplinary process to a more restorative community process. We are developing and implementing a technology policy around both cell phones and AI. This board acted on the cell phone component of that in your December meeting. We continue to have work to do around the AI component of that. And we're continuing to explore, as I mentioned to our legislators, better, more effective ways to get our story out to the community so that the whole Guilford community knows about the positive things that are happening in the Guilford schools every day. Since we're talking about budget tonight, I'm going to continue to drill down and get a little more specific, but every budget is built on a set of assumptions. Those assumptions are that, again, we start with safe and healthy school environments. Every dollar that we spend needs to go to making these schools safer and healthier, both physically and emotionally. We're always going to maintain that dogged focus on instruction. That is the reason that we're here. That is what our mission is. We are an instructional organization. We want always to be growing this district. We should always be working. The last several weeks, I've been meeting with the new teachers who joined our school district this year. I met with 4 of those teachers today. As I have talked with them about what their plans are for next year, there was one teacher who just kept repeating to me, I want to be better than I am this year. What I want to be next year is better. That's the whole school system. Every budget should help us to move forward, to extend, improve, and deepen opportunities for all of our students. And I make this point every year, we will not ask for a new dollar without having looked at the way that we're currently spending money and making sure that we haven't missed creative opportunities to better leverage the dollars that we are spending. And so this past year, there have been some significant changes specifically around how we deliver special education at the earliest levels. We have moved one of our district-wide special education programs to house it in a school so that we're spreading that load across the elementary schools rather than centering it all in one place. We've looked specifically at play-based learning and how we deliver some of our preschool program and changed the way that we deliver those services to the preschool program because it was better for students, but it was also more efficient in our budgeting process. And that's a commitment that we make every year. And our budget is built every year around our enrollment. We only budget for the students that we anticipate to see in front of us next year. It's important to note that while there is a 10-year projection on our website, the last 2 years we haven't been tracking to that projection. This year we anticipate a decrease in enrollment of approximately 31 students. I want to draw your attention to the K-4 level. 41 students we're looking at decreasing enrollment at that K-4 level. The decrease this year is really sort of focused in that elementary level. We need to be thoughtful about budget decisions and that we are only budgeting for the students who we anticipate to see in front of us each year. I usually save this slide to the end, but in this year's budget presentation, I'm moving this up to the front. I assure you, you'll see it again. It's still at the end. But I want to make a point before we start talking about the numbers in this budget, what we're talking about when we talk about Guilford Public Schools and the return on our investment. So we have taken two important measures. One is our performance in the Guilford Public Schools. Every year, the state of Connecticut calculates district's performance. They call it the Accountability Index. They look at 14 measures across all the grades that any community provides to their children, and they give you a score between 1 to 100. When you take all of those scores for every K-12 district in the state and you distribute them across a percentile ranking, Guilford Public Schools sits at the 91st percentile. We are comfortably within the top 10% of all school districts in the state of Connecticut when you base it on the single largest, most holistic state score. We are really proud of that number. We're particularly proud of that number when you compare it to where we fall by investment. When you take all of the expenditures per student across the state of Connecticut and distribute them across the same percentile distribution, we invest in our students at the 55th percentile. Our per student spending is at the 55th percentile, just above the midpoint in what we spend per student in Guilford. But our performance is in the top 10%. There's a 36 percentile discrepancy between where we invest and what our students put up in performance. And we think that's really, really important. And as we talk about budget decisions tonight going forward, I want to ask that we hold both of those numbers in our minds as we go through. As I do every year, I'm going to put the lead up front and I'm going to give this year's budget request, proposed budget, right up front. This year, we are moving forward. We are suggesting a proposed budget for the Guilford Public Schools. That should say 26-27. For the 26-27 school year of $79,684,901. That is an increase over the last fiscal year of $5,301,311. It's an increase of 7.13%. I said this last year from this podium, and I said it the year before that. I think I said it that this is the highest increase that I've made for the budget moving forward. I think it's worth looking at the history of increases and looking at the different eras that we have moved through. When I joined the Guilford Public Schools, and this chart doesn't go back far enough now to show the first couple of budgets that I was involved in, I think there's a 3.5 that falls in 12-13. But when I came to the Guilford Public Schools, we were looking at budget increases annually that fell between 2.5% and 3.5%. And then we moved into a sustained 6-year period where we were able to bring those requests down and that we were generally falling around 1.5% or 2%. We had one year that was below 1% increase. We went through this sustained period of being able to maintain really low budgetary requests. And in the last 5 years, that's changed. We're in a different time. Post-pandemic, not just Guilford, but schools across the state, Dr. Balakazzi referenced this earlier with our legislators, we are simply seeing more cost increases that are coming from outside what we do. These are not driven by local decisions. These are driven by costs that are outside of our control, but which we need to respond to. And we are currently in just a different era of budget requests. This budget that we present to you tonight at 7.1% already takes advantage of several efficiencies that I want to name. So these are already recognized in the numbers that you will see tonight. There are very limited new investments in this budget. So when I talked about that budget priority about always growing, always expanding, always being better tomorrow than we were today, we're maintaining that this year, but we're maintaining it in a very conservative, limited way. When I show you the investment slide, I'm going to draw your attention to all the white space on that slide. We've made very thoughtful decisions about where we think we need to add to this budget. This budget is already built upon significant reductions in classroom positions next year. So I will detail those later, but we have worked both with the budget number and with the class size guidance of this Board of Education that we've been talking a lot about this year to make sure that we are following that guidance and that we are budgeting for the students who we anticipate to be in seats next year. That's a difficult decision to make, but I will walk through that more specifically later on. We had a conversation earlier about special education. This budget recognizes almost a $500,000 decrease in tuition payments for special education students. For 10 years, we have been working on keeping more of our Guilford students locally in the Guilford Public Schools. We've built programs from pre-K through high school, through age 22 now to support our students in Guilford. And we are seeing the results of that. We are keeping more of our students home in Guilford schools, which allows us to send fewer dollars outside to public or private settings that meet our students' needs outside of Guilford. That's a significant piece, and we'll talk more about that very shortly. This budget includes minimal equipment purchases. It is safe to say almost no equipment purchases at the school level. There are very minimal equipment investments in this budget. We do need to replace a plow truck. That is built in here as part of a 5-year lease. I think we're still working to purchase a chariot, a carpet cleaner that we really need to keep the schools healthy. It's part of keeping the schools safe. Beyond that, there are very few equipment purchases built into this budget. And the principals have again worked really, really diligently to keep supplies and materials requests as thin as possible. To go a little deeper into some of into that special education component, this again is how we track special education expenditures. The blue line is where we have budgeted our special education over the last several years, and the red line is actual expenditure. And you will note a 5 or 6 year period where we were always overspending the special education budget. And then we moved into a 4 or 5 year period where we controlled that actual spending. We were able to bring the budget up to catch up with that spending. There's a few blips. This year, you're going to see that spending beginning to come down again. I don't like that it's starting to look like a Loch Ness monster, but we know that special education is one of the most volatile and difficult to predict areas in our budget. And we continue to be working with that. I'm going to mention this a number of times tonight. I think I mentioned it in the operations committee already, but special education identification rates post-pandemic are continuing to grow across the state, across the nation, and locally in Guilford. Over the last several years, our special education population has grown from 12% of our student population to 14% last year, and it looks like we're going to reach 16% this year. There are other Connecticut school districts where the special education identification rate is reaching 25%. We're seeing that increase in Guilford locally. Our preschool, which is a special education service that we provide, has grown over the last several years from a low of 21 to a predicted 52 students next year. That is reflective of the special education growth that we are seeing. So it is a positive that we are keeping more of those students in our district. It is good for them, it is good for their classmates, it is good for our system, but it does have an impact on the cost. And again, I'm going to show you some of the history of that cost moving forward. Every year I take a moment to look at the cost drivers, those non-discretionary cost centers that are pushing the budget. The last 4 or 5 years, it is the cost drivers that have created the story of the budget every year. We spend approximately 80% of our budget on salaries and associated benefits for our employees. Education is a people-intensive endeavor. Most of our budget, again, close to 80% of our budget, goes to salaries and the associated benefits. We provide medical insurance for our employees. This year, our medical insurance is increasing by 24 or 25% over what it was last year. That is a dollar increase of over $2.5 million that we will be setting aside to spend on the medical benefits that we are required to provide for those who we employ in the Guilford Public Schools. Salaries, again, we are a people-intensive organization. Salaries are increasing by $1.7 million this year. We have engaged in negotiations with most of the 5 bargaining units with whom we work, and we need to remain a competitive school district. So as we've negotiated new salaries with our employees, that has an impact on our budget moving forward. I want to note that it is highly unusual for the salary increase not to be the first item on this list. In a budget where 80% of our budget is built on, right, we should be seeing salary increases that outpace medical, and we're not seeing that in this budget. The medical is driving the increase. Our salary line is only going up approximately 4% this year. Our medical costs are going up 24 or 25% this year to outstrip the salary increase in real dollars significantly. I want to note here that salary number that we show is after the significant staff reductions that I have already referenced. The $1.7 million increase is after a budget that already shows 7 fewer positions in the budget this year than it did prior. Additional important cost drivers are transportation costs. We are required to provide transportation for our students. Transportation costs, when you add regular transportation, those are the big yellow buses that we see on the streets, to the more specialized transportation that we provide for some of our special education students. It's increasing by more than $500,000 this year to be able to provide that service. Our contract with a local vendor has expired. We've put a new contract out to bid. The competitive bid that we received was a 17% increase over what we were spending before. I'm going to ask you later in your meeting to award the low bid. The next lowest bid after the 17% is a 60% increase. While this is a significant increase, it is good news that we got a 17% increase to compete against a 60% increase when we went out for the competitive bid. Electricity costs, again, as Dr. Balstraci noted earlier, are up over 34%. A $369,000 increase in electricity. Now, we know everybody's familiar with the electrical increases. We run 8 buildings here in the district, so that's a significant cost increase. And then contracted special education services that we bring into the district are projected to increase by $250,000. Now, remember, that's because we're keeping more students in district. So while the outplacement cost is going down by $500,000, the contracted services that we need in district to continue to support students are going up by $250,000. It is still a net positive in the budget. These 5 items alone represent nearly a $5.5 million increase in this budget. I want to remind you, the entire budget is only going up by $5.3 million. These 5 items added together are more than the total increase of what we are presenting to you tonight, because we have found other places where we can make reductions to offset the force that these items are placing on our budget. Again, to go a little bit deeper into just one of those, into the medical spending, I think it's worth looking at the history of our medical spending, and again, to look at, we've moved through a few different eras. From 16 to 22, we were in a really good place. For 5 out of those 6 years, our medical spend was going down. We were revising our medical plan. We shifted from a point of service to a high deductible plan. We worked with negotiating with our teachers. And quite honestly, we were fortunate in that we had some good experiences where the insurance company wasn't paying out large sums. And for a long time, we were watching our medical spend come down. Last year, even though the medical increase last year drove the budget, I went to some pains to say that even though this feels terrible, we're only kind of going back to where we were in 16 and 17. It's really not an outlandish number. Well, now we're increasing again on top of that. We're in a new period where for the last 4 out of 5 years, our medical has gone up every year. And this year it's going up significantly over where we were last year. So we're now spending more on medical insurance than we have in the recent history. So every year after talking about the cost drivers, those non-discretionary costs that we need to address, I spend some time putting up and going back to one of those budget assumptions where I said, but we're not just responding to the world in the environment that we find ourselves in. We also have a plan to grow this district and to make the district better moving forward. And I usually have a slide with lots of exciting new programs and investments in teaching positions that we want to bring forward. This year, because of the magnitude of the overall budget, we're being very restrained. We're being very conservative in what we're asking for in new investments. And they both pertain directly to the special education programming. As we're seeing those special education enrollment increases that I talked about, so remember, our overall enrollment is trending down, where the percentage of students who are special ed is increasing. There are only 2 requests in this budget. One is to add a 0.6 preschool teacher that is directly tied to those increases in enrollment that we're seeing in preschool. And this 0.6 position is already working in district. We have that position filled currently, just didn't get into this year's budget. It needs to get built into next year's budget, or it will be moving backwards if we don't fund it. And additionally, there is a request here for 1 additional special educational coordinator. This is a 10-month administrative position that would be programmed at the elementary level. Currently in the school district, we employ 3 special education coordinators. These are 3 10-month administrative positions. There's 1 assigned at each level of the school system. Roughly 1 special education coordinator assigned to every 1,000 student population. So there's a high school coordinator who supports the roughly 1,000 students here at the high school. There is a middle school coordinator who supports roughly 500 students each at Baldwin and Adams. And there is an elementary school coordinator who is supporting the students in all 4 of our neighborhood elementary schools. Special ed coordinators are primarily responsible for being the liaison to the parents and the teachers and facilitating the planning and placement team meetings that happen by statute for every special education student in their grade level. Last year, the coordinators at both the middle and high school levels facilitated roughly 300 PPTs across the school year. The sole coordinator at the elementary level facilitated more than 500 PPTs at the elementary level last year. So again, as we dig deeper into both of these requests that support our special educational programming here in the district, Remember that that special education population has been growing over the last several years. I want to note that while we're only requesting a 0.6 teacher increase this year, over the last 5 years, we have added 7.5 special education teachers. We have added 2 school psychologists and 2 social workers. We've increased by 13.5 paraprofessionals in the special education programming over these last 5 years. We know that requesting an administrator is a difficult request. We know that middle management is a dirty word, but you can't grow the student population. You can't grow the staff population and not provide the management that is necessary to support that work that is happening at those levels. This request would lead us to a model next year where we continue to have 1 school special education coordinator at the high school, 1 special education coordinator at the 2 middle schools, and then 2 special education coordinators at the elementary level. 1 who would support the programming at 2 of our elementary schools and in our ABA, or our behavioral program that is housed at the elementary school, and a 2nd special education coordinator who would support the other 2 elementary schools, as well as the district-wide preschool that is placed at Lakes. If you look simply at the number of PPTs that those folks are processing, and it makes sense because the greatest increase in special education population, the greatest request from parents, the greatest need is at those youngest grades right now. And again, I want to draw your attention to that decrease in tuition that we referenced before. So without placement tuitions dropping by approximately $500,000, $482,000, even after backing out $250,000 in increased contracted services in the district, we can still pay for that special education coordinator out of the reduced money that we'll be seeing in the tuition next year as we move forward. So again, I want to draw your attention to the white space on this slide. These are the only 2 places where we think it is essential that we continue moving the work forward by investing. I want to guarantee you that we will continue moving the work forward through professional learning, through improved instruction, but we won't be adding new classroom teachers. We won't be bringing in new exciting programs. We'll continue to get better at what we already provide, but with these 2 exceptions, this budget works on providing what we already provide. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what didn't make it into this budget, and I don't often do this, but I wanted to put up a slide that shows some of the investments that were discussed. We had conversations with the leadership team earlier in the school year. We had conversations with the public earlier in the school year. We had some requests that were in last year's budget that I promised you we were going to bring back next year. I want to show you some of the things that were weighed and considered that are not part of the budget increase that sits in front of you tonight. Last year, we added 2 math intervention positions to the budget. Originally, we had programmed 4 math intervention positions, 1 for each of the elementary schools. This year, we're currently working with 2 interventionists, 1 who supports each of the 2 elementary schools. Originally, we would have liked to see the 2nd step be this year, to add 2 more. We're not suggesting that we increase that staffing at this time. We've talked for 2 years now about adding a data analyst position at the central office. When I talk about being better able to tell our story, we had talked about having somebody in the district office who could help us do that better. We're not suggesting that this is the right year to fill that position. At public hearings, we heard a number of requests that came from special education parents, but specifically we heard a request about increasing speech and language pathologist services. Last year, we added 4 curricular stipends to the budget. The original design was to add 9 or 12 curricular stipends. Teacher experts who could work with Dr. Goss in the curriculum office to help with that renewal of the curriculum every year. While this budget maintains the 4 that we added last year, it doesn't add any new. We talked for 2 years about conducting an AI facilitated transportation study to go back to conversations we've had about school start time and to see if there are any more minutes that we could squeeze out of our bus runs to allow our high school students to sleep later. While I continue to think that is a valuable conversation, we're not putting money in to fund an outside study to help us with that this year. I don't know if everybody's aware of this, but our paraprofessionals' workday is shorter than our student day. It's been a challenge for principals. We have to stagger para support in order to make that work. We had planned this year to bring a request forward to extend that para workday so that it's actually as long as the student day. We've pulled back on that request. Our elementary schools don't have clerical support in the offices over the summers. We had talked about extending that clerical year. We're not. I think this is a fairly conservative number, but I know that we redlined at least $100,000 worth of equipment requests that came from principals that are not being funded in this budget currently. We've talked for a long time about site improvements. We talked a lot at the operations committee meeting tonight about the maintenance projects that go on in the schools every year. For a long time, we have targeted 1% of our total operational budget to go into site improvements, essentially aligned to fund unscheduled, unplanned, reactionary responses to pipes that burst and need to be repaired, or when possible, thoughtful, intentional preventative maintenance projects that we can engage in and replace something before it breaks. Replace a ceiling tile when it's stained rather than waiting for it to collapse. Every year we've tried to creep up a little bit on that 1%. This year we will be flat funding the site improvement increase. The original draft suggested a growth in that area. We're not going to be adding an increase in that area. We likewise are not increasing the district-wide PD requests, and we are holding back on textbook increases this year as well. These are areas that I would have been excited to be standing here explaining to you tonight, but we know that with a budget that is currently sitting just above 7%, now is not the year to be having these conversations. I assure you that in future years, these are areas that we should be discussing, and I will be happy to bring conversation in these areas to you in future budgets. I want to spend a little bit of time detailing those staffing decreases that I have now named, but not added detail to. And so every year, again, 77–80% of our budget is in people. It's in salaries and benefits. The FTEs, the full-time equivalents, is where our budget sits. So I usually put up a slide to show the major areas when we're talking about administrative, teacher, paraclerical, custodial positions. We have approximately 600 employees in the district, if you don't count substitutes. Around 350 of those are teachers. And then you have the various support roles. So in this budget, we are requesting an increase of one administrator. It is that special education 10-month administrative position that I talked about, and I explained why we think that is an essential request this year. Additionally, we want to add one part-time position. It is a preschool teacher supporting the growing numbers at the preschool. Offsetting that 1.6 FTE increase, there are currently 2 unbudgeted kindergartens in this budget, both Lakes and Leaf over-enrolled for kindergarten. And to maintain the kindergarten sizes that we target in our board policy, we needed to add additional kindergarten sections, one at Lakes and one at Leeds. The first grade sections allow for classes to be slightly larger than the kindergarten sections. Those 2 additional sections aren't required under board policy or targeted class sizes moving forward. So while I would normally be here asking to add 2 teaching positions to this budget, we're not asking to add those 2 positions to this year's budget. It's important to note there's no reduction in the budget because of that. They're not budgeted this year, and we're not asking to carry them forward into next year. Additionally, looking very careful at the class sections this year, we see that we can eliminate 3 additional elementary class positions. These are likely going to fall, barring any change, in current grade 2 classes as they move into grade 3 classes. Grade 2 to 3 is another breakpoint in the board policy. And while we require those sections to meet the grade 2 and 3 recommended class sizes, as students move to grade 3 and 4 policy, the guidance allows for slightly larger classes. We can reduce in 3 of the 4 elementary schools as we look at that number. At Baldwin, we also know that we can reduce 2 teaching positions for the same class size rationale. As students have moved from the elementary schools into Baldwin, we know that we can remove 2 positions from Baldwin and still maintain the projected class sizes that we look at there. Where exactly those will fall, we will know more after further conversation with Mr. Buno and his team at Baldwin. They may fall at 5th grade, they may fall at 6th grade, it might be 1 at each grade level, but because of the teaming structures at Baldwin, it's a slightly more complicated conversation, and we'll have more information moving forward. Likewise, at Guilford High School, as we look at class size, looking at high school, it's a much more complicated picture. We know that we can likely make we know that we can make a reduction of 1.0 at the high school. What this will mean at the high school is looking at the various classes in the various departments, and we could, for instance, reduce the social studies department by 1 or 2 sections, which would be a reduction of 0.2 or 0.4 FTEs. We could do the same in English language arts, or in math, or in PE, or in some of the arts areas. Again, this will be finalized after we see the course requests come in from the student. At the high school, those kinds of decisions are actually driven by where the students ask to have the courses fall. So after we receive those course requests, we will look at where those changes can happen. That's a larger number than we normally. Additionally, there's 1 reduction of a clerical position, and that is housed at central office. Central office currently has a reception and freedom of information clerk position that is combined. That position is not going to return into next year's budget. The freedom of information requests will have to continue to be processed. Those responsibilities will be reassigned within the clerical group at central office. And we're not going to be having a full-time or part-time receptionist. Reception duties at central office will be picked up by the group in a rotating model at central office. We're not excited about bringing these reductions forward, but we know that, again, when we budget for the students who sit in front of us, class size drives some of those decisions. When 80% of our budget goes into personnel, and when more than half of the people that we employ work in the teaching ranks, the teacher numbers are the ones who are most directly tied to that enrollment. They are the ones that respond most immediately when enrollment is dipping or when class sizes are getting small. So that is the rationale behind the staffing decisions that are built into this budget. When you look at this budget overall then, and what is the rationale for a 7.13% budget that we put in front of the community, of the $5.4 million increase, $2.5 million of it is going into medical costs alone. If we were in one of those years where medical was flat this year, I'd be standing here tonight talking about a 4.5% budget. I wouldn't be talking about a 7% budget. Medical is the most significant story of this budget. Salary increases are important. Our teachers deserve the salaries that we pay. Our teaching salary needs to be competitive along the shoreline. The contract that this board entered into with the Teachers Association was agreed upon in mediation. It is a fair and responsible contract that will help us to continue to hire talent into the Guilford Public Schools. We need to fund that. And again, I want to note the salary increase of 1.7 million in this budget is after these reductions are made to that salary line. Additionally, we have to have school buses. We cannot refuse to provide our students with transportation. Our contract is up. The best bid on that contract was a 17% increase. We have to provide the service. We need the lights on in the buildings every day. And then there are a variety of other non-discretionary cost increases that are impacting this budget moving forward. There are other things that we have discussed that are not in this budget. When we are moving to larger class sizes and when we are reducing the teacher cohorts, it is not a year to bring in some of the other more creative suggestions that have been made around this budget. I want to note that usually I'd be taking a break in this presentation from the operational budget to talk about our bonding request. Remember that our budget goes forward every year in two parts. There is the annual operating budget, and there's usually a request for bonding projects, capital projects that need to move forward that are bonded. We have spent so much time working on this operational budget, working to understand this number and bring the most responsible number that we can forward. We do not have that bonding request ready for you tonight. We will have that for you the next time you meet to discuss this budget moving forward. It's two separate parts, but two parts of a whole. And I want to finish after that thoroughly challenging presentation. We know that this is a difficult budget year. I want to finish by again talking about that return on investment. Way back in the beginning of the presentation, I showed you the new budget era that we're in. That over the last 4 years, we've seen more significant budget increases of 3.5%, 4%, 4.5%, 5.5%. It is after those increases that the bar chart that I shared with you has been created. We are at the 55th percentile of per student spending after the significant investment of the last several years. And we remain at that net, and in fact, we've grown. Last year we were ranked at the 88th percentile statewide. This year we're at the 91st percentile statewide. We continue to be one of the most recognized school districts in the state of Connecticut because of the programming and the service that we provide to our students. I generally share with this board, I think we shared with this board earlier, the scatter plot of performance versus spending. We know that there are exactly 4 school districts in the state of Connecticut, is it 4 or 3? 3 school districts in the state of Connecticut who both outperform us on that accountability measure and underspend us. The vast majority of that 9% that are above us in performance also outspend us per student. Of those school districts that outperform but underspend us, 2 of them have been to visit us in Guilford Public Schools to look at what we do instructionally in our school system. So while they are putting up really good numbers, they also recognize the intangible quality of what's happening at Guilford Public Schools, and they have been out to visit us to look at what we are providing overall. So whether you're talking about an athletic program, an arts program, our college placements, our performance on standardized tests, outside objective evaluations, the state accountability index, we return on that investment. I know that this is a big ask of the Guilford community this year, but I also know that it is a big ask that we leverage. We are not asking to invest at the 90th percentile to get mediocre performance in this school district. We're asking for what continues to be the average per student expenditure to get an above average experience for your students who come to the Guilford Public Schools this year. I know that that's difficult. I know that it's a big conversation. I know that we have 2, 3, or 4 more meetings to continue to discuss this. We will be ready to engage in that conversation with you moving forward. It's okay, I'll go back to my seat for the discussion portion of this. I will note, Dr. Balistraci, that the first thing that we generally do is we begin that rolling list of questions and answers. And so, while we're happy to engage in conversation here tonight, we also want to invite all of you to begin putting questions that you have in writing, and we will create that rolling dialogue that we will share out, not just to you, but to the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance as well, so that we are capturing a conversation a little asynchronously as we continue to have the conversation in person.
Thank you. As Paul noted, we do have several meetings, which we'll be diving into this more, but
under the electricity section, you broke it out by school, and obviously the high school jumped extremely high. I am assuming that's because of 595 is being lumped into the high school for electricity. Or was it electricity or internet or?
So I'm gonna say that sounds right, but that would be, let us respond to that in the written document. Yeah, I want to make sure before answering that here tonight, but that sounds accurate to me.
And you're not listed anywhere else in there, so
Yeah.
that was where I came up with that. I will ask that.
So we really have heard two stories tonight, which in some sense compete with each other. One is that we're doing well with the money we have.
Yes.
And on any measure, the investment is paying off. We're not profligate in any way that we can see. And the other one is we're got an increase that is very difficult. On the face of it, independent of whether people understand the investment, one could predict that community, in light of what everybody's facing, is going to cringe on this. So the distance between the perception of the increase and the perception of the value seems to me that requires a much more robust communication strategy with the community this year than we've ever had, to try to get people to appreciate that issue. I don't know quite what that means, but unless we do that, we're gonna end up getting people who are gonna be against the budget for not necessarily the best informed reasons.
Well, I think that's right, and I think we heard our legislators talk, right, there's going to be a section spread across the state this year. And my fear is that there are going to be communities all over the state that do long-term damage to their educational programs because of a short-term sticker shock. And I know that this year is not an anomaly. It's why I wanted to show the history. But this year it's on the heels of 3 or 4 tough years already. And again, I worry that we will end up making big, broad decisions or rescissions to a budget that might feel easy to make in 1 year, but will have downstream effects that will be really hard to recover from downstream.
It's irrefutable on logic. The problem is that people are going to be looking at this emotionally, and we already have people in the community who over the years have wanted to reduce the budget by 3, 4, or 5%, independent of the question of value. That's just on principle, reduction of budgets is sort of their thing. And the problem is that they get loud, and there's not a lot of conversation. So the loud people can end up causing people to say, you know, my taxes are going to be so and so. The only way we're going to do anything is to figure out a way of engaging in a lot of teaching. I think we're going to need to talk soon, seriously, about a strategy for that.
I think that's right. And to Dr. Balistrace's point again, we're not going to be alone in that need this year. There are other school districts that are going up 6.5%, 7%. I spoke to a superintendent whose initial budget proposal was an 11% increase going forward. So yes, I think there needs to be, and I think to some degree that was the point that CAPS is trying to make. There needs to be a statewide strategy about this topic so that every single community in the state isn't trying to have the same conversation explaining why our schools are worth the investment that we're making and don't cause harm here. So I am agreeing with you. I'm saying yes, and. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no,
Always.
don't apologize.
It's called wait times.
One of the things that wasn't quite clear to me was, in terms of the medical, is it the cost of the medical insurance policy, or is it like the medical payments, or what do we know?
A really good question. I may need Linda to help me with this, but we are self-insured in Guilford, which is a little difficult for some to understand. So we work collaboratively with the town. So all school and town employees, for the most part, are part of one large insurance pool. We in fact set aside money and it's both the employee contributions and the employer contributions. We use that pool and we pay our own insurance bills out of that pool. We pay Anthem to be the administrators of that pool, both because they get us better pricing with doctors, hospitals, pharmaceuticals, and because they manage the back end of that pool. But we are self-insured. Now, in addition to that self-insurance, we then purchase a stop-loss policy. So while we cover most of our own medical bills out of the contributions that we make to that pool, we buy a policy for catastrophic costs that go way beyond any one cost that might bankrupt our pool. So what's happening is that medical bills are going up. So what we're spending is going up. Our own experience is going up. And that stop loss policy is going up significantly. And so all of the costs, mostly because of the experience of the last 4 or 5 years, are pricing up. So we know to be able to cover the costs of what we've seen, and it's always built on a rolling 12-month estimate, to be able to pay next year what we paid in the last year based on Anthem's numbers with their administrative fee and the stop loss policy that keeps us afloat. That's the increase that, how close was I?
Very accurate.
Thanks. I'm a slow learner, but I'm a learner.
But to put it another way, Ralph, if we bought a policy from Anthem or any of the other companies, we'd be paying a lot more. So in some sense, we are our own insurance company, and we've done that for years because it's much more cost effective. But in a year like this, when we say we're self-insured, some people are gonna say, well, why don't you go out and get an insurance company? Well, the insurance companies are going up 20, 30, 40.
Right, that was when you saw that dip from 10 million way back.
Well, no, we've been self-insured for a long time. A lot of that period was we went through restructuring. And so a lot of that was moving from a point of service to a high deductible plan where all of our employees were receiving the same coverage, but had to work harder for it. They had more skin in the game. We increased the employee share. And so over the last several years, every contract, the employee contribution goes up and the employer contribution goes down a little bit. We allowed individuals to buy out. We used to require every employee to have our insurance. If an employee now can show proof of insurance through a spouse or through another means, we allow them to take a really small dollar amount instead of being on our insurance. Lots of families liked having these redundant insurance policies. There was a savings for us in reducing it. So we did a lot of work, and we just went through a period where we didn't have a lot of significantly large bills. Even though we combine with the town, the bigger you make the pool, the more stable it would be. So we're a relatively small pool. And when we go through a few years of really high costs, the insurance companies see that and raise our rates. So that blue shaded history compared to the white history, a lot of it has to do on those town and school employees and their families and what kind of bills we've needed to pay to provide them with the health insurance that is part of their employment here. We keep hoping for that to turn. We keep waiting to move into another healthier phase. There's just no way to predict that. And so medical insurance and special education are the two most volatile, the most hard to predict components. And part of it is because of this requirement that we do an annual budget. I mean, if we were doing a 5-year budget, we'd be able to flatten some of that. And you can't do that in an annual budget. So what was down 2 years ago is now up $2.5 million. And that has a big impact on a $75 or $79 million budget. It's 2.5% of the increase that we're talking about here tonight is just in that medical component. I apologize if I sound like I'm lecturing. I've been
But
not sleeping on these numbers.
2 years ago, we had $5 million in reserves in our medical plan. Now we're have about 1.5 million. So the volatility is clear, and it happens to be coming at a bad time. But for years, the system was really working in our favor. now that cycle is changing, and the public ought to know that, in fact, that's what's happening. We have not been overspending on medical care for the last 5 years, but all of a sudden it's coming back to haunt us.
And it's worth noting a couple things. One, Dr. Balistraci will recall that before that chart begins, when I joined Guilford, the medical fund was in deficit of about $700,000. The town and the school needed to contribute money to get that fund afloat. And then we grew it for a number of years. It's also worth noting that every year there are a couple collaboratives that we price out. So we do look at the Connecticut insurance plan every year and talk about whether it would be beneficial or not to move to that plan. And there's a cooperative that Learn runs for some of the smaller school districts along the shoreline, where independent districts come together to become a larger pool. And we've looked at both of those, and despite our numbers this year, moving to those two wouldn't be beneficial. Neither one of them would be better than what we're looking at this year. And last year, we went out to bid for our insurance on both the administrative cost and the stop loss to see if moving to Cigna or some other provider would be better than the Anthem numbers we have. And none of those looked like they were going to be any better either. It just doesn't look like there's a better choice right now than what we're showing here. And again, it's worth noting, though, that is not just the teachers that are in that number. That is all school employees, all town employees, and their families who are insured through those numbers. And our employees pay a differential rate if you're single, if you're a +1, or if you have a family of more than 2. And again, the board members who participated in any of the negotiations that we've engaged in this year know that every year those benefits are a significant point of conversation. And every year we grow the employee portion while we reduce the employer portion just a little bit.
All right, so as we dive in individually to these budget books, as we've done in the past, please feel free to reach out to me with a list of questions that I will pass on to Mrs. Trudeau. Noting that next Tuesday, January 20th at 6 p.m., we have a joint meeting with the Board of Finance from 6 to 7:30 until they have their meeting. For the public, on Monday, January 26th, and on Tuesday, January 27th, in this room, in the High School Media Center at 7:30. We will have public hearings on the 26-27 budget. And we really encourage you to join us and let us know how you feel. If you are unable to attend either of those, you should please feel free to email us. All of our email addresses are on the school's website. We have planned on Monday, February 2nd, a special Board of Education meeting to approve the 26-27 budget and proposed bonding. Mrs. Trudeau and I had a brief conversation about the kind of last opportunity we have to vote on this budget, but I'm just going to note for my colleagues that we may either want to, on Tuesday, the 27th, kind of plan for discussion after that meeting. But I may also reach out to all of you to identify a date for an additional meeting that we may want to have, because I'm feeling like this is a lot of work and not very much meeting time planned. All
I
right.
think there's a second proposed meeting for the board if necessary, a week out from the date to approve. Is that?
It's not in the, there's a February 2nd, for our special meeting to approve. Budget submitted to the town TBD, and then we're presenting it to the Board of Finance on Thursday, February 12th.
Okay.
So Linda's, going to reach out to the town for me tomorrow and identify what's the kind of the drop deadline for getting something.
In my calendar, I still have a hold on the 9th as a second time to come together if necessary, but
Okay.
I don't know that that's anywhere else other than my calendar, but if
And well,
if we think we can turn it around by.
that's our
12th.
regular meeting, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think mostly it's just making sure, because I know it has to be, what Lynn and I were talking about is the budget has to be published before that town meeting. So Linda's gonna find that out for me. And if that's right, I mean, we have a regular scheduled meeting on the 9th. If we can go to them, we're in good shape.
As I have in the past, I will make sure that when we have those meetings, that I come with lists of suggested areas that you could either further invest in this budget. Now, a lot of those things were on the list of deferred investments, but also places where I think there could be further reductions made for this budget. I think it's clear from tonight's presentation that none of those are probably going to feel like easy areas, but I will certainly have suggestions for the board to discuss, and I know that we'll be ready to respond to any questions that you may have. It doesn't have to be on our list, obviously, for this board to be able to consider
Okay.
an area to move.
All right. Excellent. All right, I'm gonna move to 10, board agenda, act on personnel item. We've been asked to ratify the appointment of the following teacher, Nicole Ferreira, Guilford Lakes Elementary School, special education, 12 years of experience. Is there a motion to ratify this appointment? All in favor? Opposed? Or abstained? All right, that's unanimous. Thank you. 10.2 is to receive for possible action the bus transportation bid. The administration put out a bid for transportation services. It's time for us to update or renew our contract. The 8 vendors attended. I'm going to read here for a second. 8 vendors attended the mandatory pre-bid meeting. Proposals were received from 2 vendors. The current provider, our current provider, Specialty Transportation Incorporated, and Zum Services Incorporated. The administration is recommending the bid be awarded to the low bidder, Specialty Transportation Incorporated. Specialty Transportation has provided service to the district for the last 8 years at a level that has consistently met or exceeded our expectations, and the district looks forward to continuing the established relationship. We did go over numbers in the operations committee just prior to this, and most certainly our current bus provider, transportation provider, special transportation's bid was considerably lower. And because, again, they've been providing service that is meeting our needs, and as the administration has noted, consistently met or exceeded our expectations, we are being asked to approve the contract for specialty transportation. Mrs. Trudeau, is there anything you want to add to that?
No.
All right.
Covered it.
So is there a motion to approve the bid for the specialty transportation?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained. Great. And then receiving, I'm sorry, was there a question?
He was just confirming a second.
Okay, that's important. Please feel free to confirm as we get later in the evening here. Receive for possible action, request to increase pre-K tuition. The administration has brought to us a couple of proposals for pre-K tuition. A reminder to our community and those watching, we do provide preschool opportunities for children, pre-K age children who have in need of special services. Those are not part of this tuition payment. The tuition is for typical peers who are invited to apply, or parents, obviously, of typical peers who are invited to apply for a space in our pre-K program. There's a proposal here again that we discussed in some detail at our last board meeting and is coming us now as a received item. There is, one of the proposals in front of us is a 10% increase in tuition. One is a 5%. I think in our discussion during the operations committee meeting, one of the things we recognized, and we've recognized this over the last several years, is that either of these increases represent a much lower cost than any kind of private preschool would cost. Are there other thoughts or comments before we consider a proposal here?
I would just echo the sentiment that it provides a tremendous value to families in town compared to private placement. There is a note on here that I just want to call attention to that we did not discuss in operations. That is, we're removing the half-day program.
Yes, at this point, the demand and the need
Yeah.
for the students are better met with a full day program.
Makes sense. Yeah. So yeah, I would I'd be in full favor of a 10% increase. So I would motion to.
Okay, so there's a motion for the to support the 10% increase in tuition. Is there a second for that? Second. Any further conversation? All right, so motion is second, all in favor of a 10% increase in the pre-K tuition? Please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstained? All right. Thank you. We are now up for reports of committees. Policy committee, does the policy committee have anything to report us? No, no, Jesus. All right. Operations committee, anything more to report out after our meeting this afternoon?
Nothing further except one small, we had our facilities needs assessment audit done, and the administration you're reviewing it as it stands right now. So
Yeah.
we'll hear from that in coming months.
Right.
Excellent. Curriculum Instruction and Assessment Committee.
Meeting on the 26th.
All righty. Any,
I know, I was gonna point that out as well.
Oh,
Did you say?
thank you.
It's not noted
It's
in
not
the
noted.
upcoming meetings. I was gonna ask about that.
We do plan on meeting. Yep, we'll get a reminder out to everybody.
That's before the budget.
Before the
Reform.
budget workshop.
We'll get a reminder out to everybody.
liaisons to town committees, anything to report? No, and nothing from Learn. 12, public comments. Is there anyone who would like to make a public comment to the board? This does not have to be on the agenda. We just ask that you give your name and address, and please keep it to 3 minutes.
Good evening. Nate Jacobson, 1470 Long Hill Road. I'm just gonna start with a suggestion on the website under budget. This year, all that's on there is strictly numbers from previous years, where in the past it's given meeting dates, et cetera. I'm assuming a lot more is gonna go up there on that after this, but we can just include the future meeting dates. I heard a bunch of ones that I don't believe are published yet.
Okay.
To keep the community in the loop. Going through the budget process the last 10-ish years. Typically, the medical benefit expense gets fine-tuned and more accurate as we go through this process. We anticipate that's going to happen here. And on what timeline?
We can hope, but we don't expect any changes before we are making a decision, because
I understand the time, I understand.
yeah, I mean, this happens every year.
Yep.
And sometimes there is no change when there's a chance to get an additional look, and sometimes there's a small change. But what we're looking at now is what we need to plan for.
Where it's before it goes to a formal process and a referendum, where it could potentially help the 7.1%.
I can't answer that question. We don't know that
In
at this
the
time.
past, has that happened? I guess is what.
I don't think it has in my tenure. I mean, we've been surprised in certain years where we've budgeted and
Right.
It's come under, but we've never really seen the actual the actual policy numbers before a vote, correct?
There have been years that by the time it makes it to the Board of Finance, the Board of Finance having new numbers has been able to make adjustments on the bottom line for the Board of Education. They couldn't reduce our medical spend. But
But they can make a cut,
yes, that we,
assuming that we would include a reduction
yes.
in the cut.
And that has happened, but this board has to move a budget by February, and so we end up working on these numbers and maybe, but it's unpredictable.
Okay, obviously crossing the fingers and hope that can happen. Third, final. I'm hoping, I don't know if now is the time on the question that Dr. Freeman can articulate how an unbudgeted item. I'm assuming there's contingencies in a budget, the 2 kindergarten teachers, the 0.6. An unbudgeted item obviously is paid when it comes from somewhere. The public may look at this and wonder how all of a sudden are we absorbing 2.6 full-time teachers. So I don't know if now is the best time for that in the future meeting.
I can quickly answer and then happy to answer more. We create a budget, it goes to the Board of Finance. The Board of Finance makes a determination of whether they want us to reduce it or not. A formal budget is then put forward to the town and voted on, and that usually happens in April. Occasionally, what happens then over the summer, as we head to the fall and the academic year, is we have a much higher kindergarten enrollment, for instance, than is anticipated. So this past year was not the first year in my 14 years on the board when the administration has had to add a kindergarten teacher or 2 in order to meet our classroom size guidance for kindergarten. And then something else over the year gets reduced to make up for that.
Yeah,
Another line.
I guess that's more my question, and I'm hoping the public is aware of. It's
Right.
not like the board goes to the town and
No.
asks for additional funding.
No,
It comes from somewhere.
it ends up having to come from somewhere else or, yeah,
That's where I'm just suggesting that
Yeah.
gets articulate, just,
okay.
it jumped out at me like, wait a minute.
Yeah, no, it does
a
feel
significant
unusual. Yeah,
Expense, 2.66 teachers that all of a sudden they found, but there's no rationale as to
Right.
where it came.
okay. Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
All right. We've come to the end of the meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn? All in favor? Aye. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. Good night.